These are prehistoric creatures that should not exist. The fossil record is a testament to the incredible and often baffling diversity of life that has graced our planet, with many ancient species challenging our modern understanding of biology and evolution. These bizarre forms highlight how natural selection can sometimes lead to designs that appear counterintuitive, yet were successful in their specific ecological niches for millions of years. Let's start with something that looks like someone pulled a lizard's neck like taffy and forgot to stop. So there's this creature called the Tanystropheus. The first thing you need to know is that its neck was 3 meters long. That's about 10 feet for our American friends out there, which would be fine except the neck was half of its entire body length. The full scientific name of this reptile is Tanystropheus longobardicus, and it lived during the Middle Triassic period, approximately 247 to 237 million years ago, primarily in what is now Europe and China. Its exceptionally long neck makes it one of the most distinctive and puzzling marine reptiles ever discovered, often compared to mythical sea serpents by early paleontologists. The other half was just a normal stubby reptile body, like someone built a lizard, got bored halfway through, and just kept adding neck. This disproportionate body plan meant that while its neck was incredibly elongated, the torso and limbs remained relatively small and compact, resembling a typical lizard. The overall body length, including the neck, could reach up to 6 meters, about 20 feet, making the neck a truly dominant feature. Now here's where it gets worse. That 3-meter neck only had 13 bones in it. For reference, you have 7 bones in your neck. Giraffes have 7. This thing had 13, but they were stretched out so far the whole neck was basically stiff. Each of these 13 cervical vertebrae was extremely elongated, contributing to the neck's incredible length, but also severely restricting its flexibility. This anatomical constraint meant that Tanystropheus could not bend its neck into a graceful S-shape like a modern swan or even a giraffe, which has fewer but more mobile vertebrae. So it couldn't really turn its head. It just had this long, rigid pole sticking out of its body that it had to drag around everywhere. This rigid structure would have made maneuvering on land exceptionally difficult, leading scientists to initially question its terrestrial capabilities. Imagine trying to navigate dense vegetation or uneven terrain with a stiff, 10-foot pole extending from your shoulders. It would be a constant impediment. Scientists have looked at this thing for years, and they couldn't figure out what it was doing. Some thought it lived on land. Some thought it lived in the water, but nobody could agree because the whole design just made no sense. Early reconstructions depicted Tanystropheus as a terrestrial or semi-aquatic animal, with its neck possibly used for reaching vegetation or even as a display structure. The enigma of its lifestyle persisted for decades due to the unique combination of its long neck and otherwise generalized reptilian body. And then they did some more research and found out it was a fish eater, which actually explains a lot. This discovery, supported by gut contents and tooth morphology, provided a crucial breakthrough in understanding its ecology. Its small, pointed teeth were perfectly adapted for catching slippery fish and cephalopods, much like a modern heron or kingfisher. See, tiny trophies would hang out in shallow water and just stay completely still. Its body would be hidden under the surface, and it would stick that ridiculous neck out towards fish. This hunting strategy, often referred to as sit-and-wait predation, allowed Tanystropheus to ambush unsuspecting prey. Its cryptic body position, submerged in murky water, would have made it nearly invisible to passing fish. The fish wouldn't see it coming because the neck was so thin and the head was so small. The slender neck, only slightly thicker than a pencil in some areas, and the small, streamlined head would have created minimal disturbance in the water, making the Tanystropheus an incredibly stealthy predator. This low-profile approach contrasts sharply with the bulkier head and neck movements of most marine predators. And then boom, Tanystropheus would snap its jaws shut, and then that was lunch. This sudden, rapid strike would have been highly effective, capitalizing on the element of surprise. The biomechanics of its jaw closure suggest a quick, powerful snap, ensuring a firm grip on its aquatic prey. This thing basically turned itself into a biological fishing pole, which works great in water. On land, though, it was just walking around with a 10-foot neck that couldn't really bend, which is absolutely terrible design for literally anything else. This specialized adaptation for aquatic ambush predation came at a significant cost for terrestrial locomotion, making it slow and clumsy on land. The trade-off highlights the intense selective pressures that can drive extreme specialization in evolution, favoring efficiency in one environment over versatility in others. And that's probably why it's not around anymore. Its highly specialized lifestyle might have made it vulnerable to environmental changes or shifts in prey availability. While it was successful for a period, its lack of adaptability to other environments or hunting strategies could have contributed to its eventual extinction. Let's move on, though. When you think about it, most creatures that can fly use their front limbs. This creature said they're not going to do that. The evolution of flight in vertebrates has almost exclusively involved the modification of forelimbs into wings. This design principle is evident across countless species, underscoring its evolutionary success and mechanical efficiency. Birds use their front limbs to fly. Bats use their front limbs to fly. Pterosaurs use their front limbs to fly. This consistent pattern across widely divergent flying groups Aves, Chiroptera, and Pterosauria demonstrates a strong evolutionary convergence on the use of forelimbs for aerial locomotion. Each group independently evolved wings, yet all leveraged their anterior appendages for this purpose. Every single flying thing uses its front limbs for wings because that's just how flying works. Except Sharovipteryx looked at that and decided to do the complete opposite. This revolutionary design, observed in Sharovipteryx mirabilis, challenged all conventional notions of vertebrate flight. It presented an unprecedented solution to the problem of aerial locomotion, demonstrating the vast experimental capacity of evolution. This thing had wings on its back legs. Not its front legs, but its back legs. The membrane stretched between its hind legs and tail and made a triangle shape. Scientists have since described this unique structure as a patagium that ran from its elongated hind limbs to its tail, forming a delta wing configuration. This arrangement is utterly unique among known vertebrates, making Sharovipteryx an evolutionary outlier. Scientists call it a delta wing because it looked kind of like a paper airplane. A delta wing is characterized by its triangular shape and a broad leading edge, often used in high-speed aircraft due to its aerodynamic properties. This comparison offers a vivid image of Sharovipteryx's unusual gliding surface and its potential aerodynamic performance. And its front legs were tiny and basically useless for flying. So when this thing glided through the air, it was doing it backwards with its front half just hanging there with its back half doing all the work. The vestigial nature of its forelimbs further emphasizes the radical departure from typical flying vertebrate anatomy. This created an almost reverse flight profile, where the primary lift and control surfaces were located at the posterior of its body. And look, there's only one fossil of this thing. Just one. It was found in Kistan, and it's about 225 million years old. This singular discovery in the Madigan Formation of Kyrgyzstan makes Sharovipteryx an incredibly rare and significant find from the late Triassic period. The scarcity of fossils makes detailed biomechanical analysis challenging, but also underscores the uniqueness of this creature. So we can't be totally sure how well this design worked. The limited fossil evidence means that much of our understanding of Sharovipteryx's flight dynamics and ecological role is based on inference and comparison to modern gliders. Scientists continue to model its potential aerodynamic efficiency to better understand its capabilities. The fossil has impressions of the wing membrane on it, so we know the back leg wings were real. This isn't a mistake. This thing really was built like that. These preserved soft tissue impressions are critical, providing undeniable proof of the membrane's existence and attachment points. Without these impressions, the interpretation of its unique anatomy would be far more speculative. The way it probably worked is Sharopter would climb up a tree or a cliff, spread its back legs out into a triangle, and then jump. And the triangle would catch air and it would glide down. This launch and glide strategy is common among many modern arboreal gliding animals, such as flying squirrels and colugos. The elevation gained from climbing would provide the necessary height for effective gliding. Little front limbs might have helped with steering, or maybe they didn't. It's hard to say. The small size and morphology of the forelimbs suggest they might have played a minor role in pitch or roll control, perhaps acting as small canards or stabilizers. However, their primary function likely remained limited given the dominance of the hind limb tail patagium. The main thing is that this animal's gliding around with its wings on the wrong end of its body. No other animal in the history on Earth has ever done anything like this. This anatomical reversal of the typical flight plan remains a profound enigma in paleontology and evolutionary biology. It represents an unparalleled evolutionary experiment in aerial locomotion. Nothing alive today does it. Nothing extinct does it. Just Sharovipteryx tried this wild experimental design for a few million years and then went extinct and nobody ever tried it again. The unique design of Sharovipteryx suggests a short-lived, highly specialized evolutionary pathway that ultimately proved to be a dead end in the long history of vertebrate flight. Its disappearance implies that while innovative, this hind limb-based flight mechanism may have been less efficient or adaptable than forelimb-based flight. This is the fearsome Gorgosaurus rex. His name is Flapjack. And this is a fearsome apex predator from the prehistoric period. You don't want to mess with him. And speaking of flying, you usually need feathers to fly. Well, before feathers existed, this lizard already had them. The advent of feathers is typically associated with the evolution of birds and theropod dinosaurs, playing crucial roles in insulation, display, and eventually flight. However, the existence of feather-like structures on Longisquama insignes predates the commonly accepted timeline for true feathers, posing a fascinating evolutionary puzzle. So Longisquama was a little lizard that lived about 235 million years ago, which is pretty normal so far, except it had these long scales growing out of its back that looked exactly like feathers. Longisquama insignes hails from the Middle to Late Triassic period, found in the Madigan Formation of Kyrgyzstan, the same locale as Sharovipteryx. This small, lizard-like diapsid displayed a series of elongated, ribbon-like appendages along its dorsal midline, each with a central shaft and parallel barb like filaments. But feathers didn't exist yet. Birds weren't even around. The evolutionary timeline places the earliest known bird, Archaeopteryx, much later in the late Jurassic, around 150 million years ago. This temporal discrepancy makes the feather-like structures of Longisquama particularly perplexing, as they appeared roughly 80 million years before the widely accepted emergence of avian feathers. So this thing had 6 or more of these structures sticking up from its spine. Each one could be as long as the entire lizard. With a body length of only about 10 to 15 centimeters, some of these plumes could extend for similar lengths, creating a striking and elaborate dorsal display. The sheer scale of these appendages in proportion to its body size would have made it an exceptionally noticeable creature in its environment. When scientists first found this thing in 1970, they didn't really know what to do with it. Some people said maybe these are early feathers. Maybe this creature is related to birds. The initial discovery sparked considerable debate among paleontologists, with some proposing Longisquama as a potential ancestor or close relative of birds, thereby pushing back the origins of feathers and avian flight significantly. This hypothesis challenged established phylogenetic relationships and ignited a long-standing controversy. And that started a whole debate that's still going on today. But most scientists now think these weren't feathers at all. They were just scales that happen to look a lot like feathers, which somehow makes it weirder. The prevailing scientific consensus now categorizes these structures as highly modified, elongated reptilian scales, distinct from the follicular, keratinous structures of true feathers. This distinction, while clarifying its evolutionary position, makes the convergent evolution of such complex structures even more remarkable. The current idea is that Longisquama used these things for showing off. You know how peacocks have those big fancy tails? Well, same concept here, except Longisquama had these long plume things on its back, and it was living in the Triassic period when nothing else was doing that. These elaborate dorsal structures would have served as an unmistakable visual signal, potentially indicating health, fitness, or territorial claims. In the Triassic, where complex visual displays were less common among reptiles, Longisquama would have stood out. So it probably climbed around in trees with these 6 giant scales waving around trying to impress other longisquamas. Its small size and arboreal adaptations suggest it was adept at navigating tree branches, where its distinctive plumes would have been prominently displayed. This behavior aligns with display mechanisms seen in many modern lizards and birds, albeit with a unique structural basis. Also, there's a chance it used them to glide short distances. Maybe it could spread them out and parachute down the trees, but they weren't real wings. They were just decorative scales that maybe caught some air. While not true wings, the broad surface area of the plumes might have offered some aerodynamic assistance during falls or short glides between branches. This would have provided a practical advantage beyond just display, acting as a rudimentary parachute or stabilizer. The whole thing is bizarre because this wasn't part of any major evolutionary lineage. It didn't lead to anything. Birds evolved feathers completely separately. This indicates that the feather-like structures of longisquama represent an independent evolutionary experiment, an example of parallel evolution where similar forms arise from different ancestral paths. Its unique morphology places it as an isolated branch on the tree of life, distinct from the ancestors of modern birds. Longest squamama just showed up in the Triassic with fake feathers, existed for a while, and then disappeared. No descendants, no legacy. Just a weird little lizard that decided to grow feather-looking scales for no reason that matters today. Its fleeting presence in the fossil record suggests that while its design was striking, it didn't confer a widespread evolutionary advantage that led to further diversification. Longisquama remains a testament to evolution's capacity for producing highly specialized and ultimately ephemeral forms. So decorative scales are one thing, but a shrike chameleon with a hook for a hand is different. This anatomical specialization in Triadobotrachus, Triadogorgon, presents a case of extreme adaptation for a very specific foraging strategy. While chameleons are known for their gripping tails and independent eye movements, Triadobotrachus' hand structure is unparalleled. Japanosaurus lived in trees during the late Triassic, and it had a tail that could wrap around branches. It could grip stuff. It could climb around, which was all normal chameleon behavior. The correct name for this creature is Drepanosaurus unguicaudatus, living approximately 210 million years ago in Italy. Its prehensile tail, which could make up half its total body length, was a key adaptation for its arboreal lifestyle, allowing it to move securely through tree canopies much like modern chameleons and some primates. And then you look at its hands, and then you notice something's very wrong. One finger on each hand grew into this massive curved claw, just one. The other fingers were tiny and useless. This highly modified third digit, often referred to as a hook hand, was disproportionately large and robust compared to the other 4 digits, which were reduced to mere nubs. This extreme specialization for a single large claw is almost unheard of in vertebrate limbs. So, it's got these 2 giant hooks where its hand should be. Each claw was thick and powerful and shaped kind of like the tool you would use to open a can. Actually, that's what paleontologists call it, a can opener claw. The robust construction of this claw suggests it was capable of exerting considerable force. Its unique morphology quickly earned it the colloquial name among researchers, reflecting its presumed function. Now you're probably thinking, well, there's no cans back then. What was this thing opening? And that answer is bark. Drepanosaurus would hang out in trees and just rip apart the bark, looking for insects. This specialized foraging method involved using its powerful claw to pry open crevices and tear away layers of tree bark to expose hidden arthropods and larvae. This niche, known as arboreal invertebrate, is rarely seen with such a dedicated anatomical adaptation. It'd hook its claw into a piece of wood and tear it open and eat whatever bugs were hiding inside. The force generated by its arm and shoulder muscles, combined with the leverage of the can opener claw, allowed it to efficiently access prey that was otherwise inaccessible to other tree-dwelling insectivores. This strategy would have provided a reliable food source in its forest environment. The wrist bones were really strong, too. They were built to handle all that ripping and tearing. The robust wrist and forearm bones, along with strong muscle attachments, provided the necessary structural integrity to withstand the immense mechanical stresses of tearing into wood. This anatomical reinforcement is crucial for its specialized feeding behavior. Its tail also had this weird-looking hook thing at the end. It was extra vertebrae that formed a second claw situation, so it could wrap its tail around a branch, hang there upside down, and use both hands to destroy some bark. This caudal claw, or spine, on its prehensile tail provided an additional anchor point, allowing Drepanosaurus to secure itself even more firmly to branches. This enabled it to free up its forelimbs for rigorous foraging without losing its grip. It had free hands because the tail was doing the holding. It's a pretty smart setup, actually. This combined use of a prehensile tail for support and specialized forelimbs for foraging represents a highly efficient and unique adaptation for its arboreal insectivorous diet. This dual-pronged approach maximized its ability to exploit a specific food resource. The first fossils that they found were just fragments, and a paleontologist looked at the huge claw and the weird tailbones and said he couldn't even picture what this animal looked like. Early fragmented remains often lead to imaginative, yet inaccurate, reconstructions as scientists grapple with piecing together incomplete anatomical puzzles. The extreme nature of these isolated bones made it particularly challenging to envision the complete animal. It took more complete fossils to figure it out, and when they put it all together, it was just this slow little tree lizard that spent its whole life hanging around. Subsequent discoveries of more complete skeletons, including a near-perfect specimen in northern Italy, finally revealed the true form and lifestyle of Drepanosaurus. This slow-moving, deliberate creature was perfectly adapted to its arboreal niche, prioritizing stability and strength over speed. And ripping wood apart for food. Nothing alive today does this exact thing. Anteaters exist, but they're on the ground. Woodpeckers exist, but they use their beaks. Drepanosaurus uniquely combined the arboreal lifestyle of a chameleon with the wood-ripping behavior of a modern woodpecker or a terrestrial anteater, but using its specialized hands. This distinct evolutionary path showcases how different lineages can converge on similar ecological roles through wildly different anatomical means. The Drepanosaurus combined both of the ideas and did it in the trees 210 million years ago. Now that's weird, but let's talk about a dinosaur where scientists didn't get it right the first time. Scientific understanding of prehistoric life is an iterative process, often subject to revision as new evidence emerges or existing fossils are re-evaluated with advanced techniques. This story underscores the dynamic nature of paleontological discovery and interpretation. When they first found Atopodentatus, they thought its mouth was split vertically down the middle. They thought it had 2 rows of teeth meeting in a zipper. This initial interpretation, based on crushed and distorted fossil remains, suggested a truly bizarre oral anatomy unlike anything known in the animal kingdom. The visual appearance of the fossil, with a prominent midline suture, strongly influenced this early, erroneous reconstruction. Nobody had ever seen that before because it doesn't exist because they got it completely wrong. The proposed zipper mouth was so outlandish that even at the time, many paleontologists expressed skepticism, but the available evidence was limited. This example serves as a stark reminder that even experienced scientists can be misled by the fragmentary nature of the fossil record. The fossils were crushed and broken and hard to piece together, so they did their best and published this reconstruction showing a marine reptile with a zipper mouth. The inherent challenges of fossil preservation, particularly in ancient marine environments, often result in specimens that are highly distorted by geological pressures. Despite these difficulties, researchers published their findings, openly acknowledging the speculative nature of some interpretations. And everyone looked at it and thought they can't be right. But those were the fossils that they had, so that's what they published. This illustrates the scientific process, publishing the best interpretation based on available data, even when it seems improbable, to allow for peer review and further investigation. The scientific community's collective skepticism ultimately spurred the search for more definitive evidence. Then in 2016, they found better specimens, more complete skulls. And it turned out the mouth wasn't split at all. It was just smashed weird in the first fossils. The discovery of remarkably well-preserved, 3-dimensional skulls from Liuping, Yunnan Province, China, provided irrefutable evidence that the initial interpretation was incorrect. These new fossils allowed for a precise and accurate reconstruction of its cranial anatomy. What it actually had was a hammerhead-shaped snout. It was wide and flat across the front with two sets of teeth with completely different jobs. The hammerhead-shaped snout, reminiscent of some modern shark species, was a unique adaptation for its specialized feeding strategy. This broad, flat anterior structure housed two distinct dentitions, each serving a specific purpose in its herbivorous diet. The front edge of the hammerhead had chiseled teeth. They were flat and good for scraping. These broad, spatulate teeth were perfectly suited for detaching tough algal mats and other encrusting vegetation from rocky substrates. Their flat, robust design allowed for efficient scraping without damaging the underlying rock. Atopodentatus would swim up to a rock covered in algae and press its face against it. Then it would scrape the chiseled teeth along the surface and strip all of the plants off, just mowing that algae right off the rock. This specialized grazing behavior, akin to a marine lawnmower, made Atopodentatus unicus a highly efficient primary consumer in its ecosystem. Its method allowed it to access a plentiful food source unavailable to most other marine reptiles. After it scraped up a mouthful of plant mush and water, it would close its jaws. Then the second set of teeth were these long needles lining the sides of its mouth. Water would filter out through the gaps, and the needle teeth would trap all the algae inside. It was a built-in strainer. These fine, needle-like teeth formed an effective sieve, allowing water to escape while retaining the suspended plant matter. This sophisticated filter feeding mechanism highlights an advanced adaptation for herbivory in a marine reptile. This thing was 3 meters long and lived 244 million years ago. It is actually the first known planting marine reptile, and we only figured that out 8 years ago because the first fossils looked like a zipper monster. Atopodentatus unicus dates back to the Middle Triassic period, establishing it as the earliest known marine reptile adapted for herbivory, a discovery that significantly broadened our understanding of Triassic marine ecosystems. Its true identity as a filter-feeding herbivore revolutionized its ecological placement within its ancient environment. The name means unique arrangement of teeth, which is pretty damn accurate, but they named it that when they thought it had a zipper mouth. So the name's right for the wrong reasons, even though it still has quite a strange mouth setup. The fortuitous accuracy of its scientific name, despite the initial misinterpretation, remains a quirky anecdote in paleontological history. Even with its corrected morphology, the mouth of Atopodentatus is undeniably unique and bizarre, justifying its moniker. And speaking of weird-looking sharp, pointy things like teeth, there's a dinosaur with claws longer than swords. The sheer scale and unexpected function of these claws make the Rhizinosaurus cheloniformis one of the most enigmatic dinosaurs. Its discovery challenged the traditional view of theropods as exclusively carnivorous predators. The Rhizinosaurus was a theropod, which is the same group that includes the T-Rex and Velociraptor. The meat-eaters, the predators, and Theosaurus had the longest claws of any animal that has ever lived. These colossal claws, reaching up to 70 centimeters or 27.5 inches in length along the outer curve, far surpassed those of any other known terrestrial creature. This record-breaking feature immediately set the Rhizinosaurus apart from its theropod relatives, known for their predatory adaptations. They were nearly 70 centimeters long, which is over 2 feet. Each claw was as long as a baseball bat. The robust construction and immense size of these claws are evident from fossil remains, showcasing their formidable presence. To visualize this, imagine a predatory animal with a claw longer than a human forearm on each digit. But here's the thing, it ate plants. When they first found the claws in the 1940s, they thought they belonged to a giant turtle because nothing else made sense to have claws this big. This herbivorous diet, confirmed by later skeletal discoveries and tooth morphology, was a radical departure for a theropod, a group typically characterized by carnivorous adaptations. The initial misidentification as a turtle highlights the profound surprise and confusion these claws caused. It actually took decades before they found the rest of the skeleton, and when they put it together, everyone realized this was a dinosaur that broke every rule. The discovery of more complete skeletal elements in the 1960s and 70s, including skull fragments and pelvic bones, gradually revealed the true nature of the Oryzinosaurus. The fully assembled skeleton presented a creature so unusual that it necessitated a re-evaluation of theropod evolution. It was huge. In fact, it was over 7 meters long, weighed about 5 tons. This impressive size, comparable to that of a large elephant or a smaller Tyrannosaurus rex, made the Oryzinosaurus a dominant figure in its late Cretaceous Mongolian environment. Its bulk indicated it was a formidable presence, despite its herbivorous diet. But instead of being fast and sleek, it was slow and pot-bellied. It had a long neck with small teeth, and its teeth were shaped for eating leaves. Its broad, heavily built body and relatively short hind limbs suggest a slow, deliberate gait, contrasting sharply with the agile, cursorial forms of many other theropods. The small, leaf-shaped, lanceolate teeth were perfectly adapted for processing tough plant material, further confirming its herbivorous nature. The whole thing just looked wrong. It was basically a theropod that gave up hunting and just started eating salads. This dietary shift represents a dramatic evolutionary innovation within the theropod lineage, demonstrating that predatory ancestry does not preclude the evolution of specialized herbivory. It's a compelling example of exaptation, where existing structures are repurposed for new functions. In fact, those giant claws weren't for killing. They were for pulling branches down, reaching up into trees and hooking the foliage and dragging it close enough to eat and maybe for defense. If a Tarbosaurus showed up looking for a meal, their Xenosaurus could swing those claws and do some serious damage. This interpretation of the claws as feeding tools for browsing high foliage makes perfect sense for a large herbivore. The immense reach and strength would have allowed the Oryzinosaurus to access a broader range of plant matter, especially tougher branches. Probably. This is highly debated, and it's not well known if these were in fact incredibly sharp or if they were super brittle. Some paleontologists suggest the claws might have been relatively dull at the tips, more suited for raking and hooking than piercing, while others argue for a more formidable defensive weapon. The exact nature of their cutting edges and their resistance to breakage are still subjects of ongoing research and analysis. It might have feathers, too. Some of its relatives have been found with feathers. So, picture a 5-ton pot-bellied dinosaur covered in feathers with giant hook claws just slowly wandering around eating leaves. The discovery of feathered theropods, especially within the Maniraptora group to which the Oryzinosaurus belongs, makes the presence of feathers highly probable. This visual adds another layer of bizarre beauty to an already extraordinary creature, challenging traditional reptilian depictions. That's Theosaurus. It's basically a giant murder chicken. The name means scythe lizard because the claws look like scythes, which are farming tools. It's pretty accurate. This descriptive moniker aptly captures both its fearsome weaponry and its unusual dietary preference, evoking an image of a formidable, albeit gentle, giant. The scythe analogy perfectly describes the long, curved, blade-like appearance of its massive claws. This thing was basically a gardener, just a really big one with weapons for hands. And it survived until the end of the Cretaceous doing this, by being a giant peaceful plant eater in a family full of killers. Its success as a large herbivore within a lineage of apex predators highlights the adaptability of life and the diverse evolutionary paths available even within closely related groups. The Oryzinosaurus carved out a unique ecological niche, thriving until the KPG extinction event. But if you think that's odd, wait until you see the dinosaur that tried to be a crocodile. The evolutionary trajectory of Spinosaurus aegyptiacus D demonstrates a profound convergence with crocodilians, adapting to a semi-aquatic, piscivorous lifestyle in a manner unprecedented for large theropod dinosaurs. Its specialized features highlight an extreme departure from typical theropod morphology. Spinosaurus is the biggest carnivorous dinosaur that has ever existed. It was longer than T-Rex and heavier, too, and it spent most of its time in the water eating fish, which dinosaurs weren't really supposed to do. Reaching lengths of up to 15-16 meters, 50-53 feet, and weighing over 7 metric tons, Spinosaurus surpassed Tyrannosaurus rex and Giganotosaurus in sheer size, making it the largest known predatory dinosaur. This dominant predator uniquely occupied an aquatic niche, challenging previous assumptions about large dinosaurian ecology. Everything about this is wrong for a dinosaur. It had a crocodile skull. It was long and narrow with conical teeth, perfect for catching slippery prey. Its elongated, low-slung skull, armed with straight, conical teeth, was ideally suited for gripping and holding struggling fish, much like modern crocodilians. This distinct cranial morphology is a clear adaptation to a piscivorous diet. Its back legs were short and they were not built for running on land. And then there's the tail. The disproportionately short hind limbs and broad feet with flattened claws, discovered in more recent fossil finds, indicated limited terrestrial mobility and increased stability in shallow water. These anatomical features strongly supported its preference for an aquatic environment. In 2020, they found tail fossils that showed it actually has a paddle. Yes, an actual fin for swimming, which is the first dinosaur that has ever been found to have that. The groundbreaking discovery of a tall, fin-like tail in 2020 provided definitive proof of its powerful aquatic propulsion. This unique caudal structure, resembling a paddle, confirmed Spinosaurus status as the most aquatic of all known non-avian dinosaurs, capable of active pursuit in water. The sail on its back was also huge. Some of the spines were over a meter tall, sticking straight up. It could have been used for temperature control. Could have been used for showing off to other Spinosauruses. It could have helped it stay stable in the water. Nobody's totally sure, but it was definitely there, and it was definitely massive. The immense neural spines, forming a prominent sail up to 1.7 meters, 5 feet high, remain a subject of intense scientific speculation regarding its exact function. This dramatic dorsal structure would have made Spinosaurus an unmistakable sight in its ancient African wetlands. Here's what probably happened. Spinosaurus would wade into rivers and swamps and use the padlet tail to swim around. Its nostrils were high up on its snout so it could breathe while most of its head was underwater. This combination of a powerful paddle tail for propulsion and dorsally placed nostrils for breathing allowed Spinosaurus to effectively navigate and hunt in aquatic environments. It could submerge much of its body while still maintaining respiration, increasing its stealth as a predator. And it would hunt giant fish. We know there were huge fish in its environment, some as big as cars. So Spinosaurs would snap them up in its crocodile jaws, and that was dinner. The fossil record of the Bahariya Formation in Egypt, where Spinosaurus lived, indicates the presence of enormous freshwater fish like Onchopristes, a sawfish that could reach up to 8 meters, 26 feet in length. These colossal fish would have provided ample prey for the massive Spinosaurus. It might have walked on all fours in shallow water, too. The limb proportions are weird enough that some scientists think it spent time on 4 legs, which is wild because theropods don't usually do that. The short hind limbs and robust forelimbs have led some researchers to propose a semi-quadrupedal stance for Spinosaurus when moving in shallow water or on land, further differentiating it from the typically bipedal theropod gait. This interpretation highlights its unique locomotor adaptations for a mixed terrestrial and aquatic existence. They found the first Spinosaurus fossils in 1912, but it took over 100 years to figure out it was actually a swimming dinosaur. Early reconstructions, largely based on incomplete remains and prevailing biases, depicted Spinosaurus as a more conventional bipedal theropod, albeit with a sail. These initial interpretations focused on its terrestrial attributes, overlooking its profound aquatic specializations. Early reconstruction just showed it standing upright with a sail, normal theropod dinosaur stuff. Now, we know it was doing something no other big dinosaur did, living in the water. The shift in understanding Spinosaurus biology represents one of the most significant paleontological paradigm shifts in recent decades, driven by new fossil discoveries and advanced analytical techniques. Its unique aquatic adaptations now define its place in the dinosaurian pantheon. So dinosaurs doing weird stuff is one thing, but the pterosaur took it further. You know what's really weird? Flying reptiles, pterosaurs, fine, we accept that. We've heard of it by now. Pterosaurs, the flying reptiles of the Mesozoic era, represent an astonishing evolutionary achievement, being the first vertebrates to conquer powered flight. Their diversity in size and form from sparrow-sized to giraffe-necked giants, continues to fascinate and challenge our understanding of biomechanics. Then you got Nicosaurus, which had a head crest longer than its entire body, shaped like antlers. Why? Just why? The correct name for this pterosaur is Nyctosaurus gracilis, and its elaborate head crest, composed of two incredibly long, bony prongs, is indeed one of the most extreme examples of cranial ornamentation in the fossil record. This dramatic feature, disproportionate to its body size, immediately raises questions about its purpose. Well, this thing's wingspan was about 2 m, which is a normal size for a pterosaur, but the crest on the back of its skull was nearly 2 ft tall. With a relatively modest wingspan for a pterosaur, Nyctosaurus still possessed an impressive aerial presence. However, the true spectacle was its cranial crest, which could extend almost 60 cm, 2 feet, from the back of its skull, dwarfing its own head and neck. It had two long bony spines forming a Y shape, one going straight up and one going back. And it was just bone. No membrane, no skin flap, just two giant antlers sticking off of its head while it tried to fly around. The crest was composed of solid bone, forming a bifurcated antler-like structure with no evidence of soft tissue extensions, making it an undeniable skeletal ornament. This rigid, unaerodynamic appendage would have presented significant challenges during flight, acting as a source of drag. Scientists thought maybe there was a sail stretched between the prongs. You know, at least that would make some sense and give it a purpose. But the evidence says no, it was just bare bone, an ornament dead weight, something it had to carry around for no practical reason. The absence of rugosities, rough areas for tissue attachment, or other indicators of soft tissue attachments on the bony prongs strongly suggests the crest was indeed unadorned. This conclusion only deepens the mystery of its function, given the metabolic cost of growing and maintaining such a structure. So why have it then? The best guess is showing off mating displays. Look at my giant head antlers. I'm clearly the best Nicosaurus. All the ladies would see these things from far away and make their choice. In many animal species, elaborate and seemingly impractical adornments are key indicators of genetic fitness, demonstrating an individual's ability to survive despite a handicap. The impressive crest of Nyctosaurus would have served as a highly effective visual signal in courtship rituals, signaling vigor and health to potential mates. Or it helped with species recognition. Hey, that's another Nicosaurus. I can tell by the ridiculous antlers. I'm going to hang out with them. In a diverse pterosaur environment, a unique and prominent crest could also aid in quickly identifying conspecifics, facilitating social cohesion or territorial demarcation. This form of visual communication would have been especially useful for a creature spending much of its life in the open sky. The rest of it was pretty normal. It was toothless, streamlined, and it flew over warm seas and caught fish, which is pretty standard pterosaur behavior. Despite its outrageous crest, Nyctosaurus possessed many features typical of pelagic pterosaurs, including a lightweight, toothless skull and elongated wings optimized for efficient soaring over ancient marine environments. Its primary diet consisted of fish, which it likely snatched from the ocean's surface. The whole time it's got this massive forked crest catching wind and adding drag and making everything harder. And it worked, but it shouldn't have. They survived for millions of years with these things. The continued success of Nyctosaurus for at least 10 million years, despite the aerodynamic disadvantage of its crest, suggests that the evolutionary benefits of sexual selection or species recognition outweighed the costs of increased drag. This enduring presence in the fossil record is a testament to the power of non-survival-driven evolutionary pressures. The mating advantage must have been worth it. Evolution decided that having a huge, flashy billboard on your head was more important than being aerodynamic. This highlights the concept of runaway sexual selection, where a trait becomes exaggerated not because of direct survival benefits, but because it enhances reproductive success. The visual display would have been crucial for attracting mates in the wide, open skies. In fact, there were lots of pterosaurs with crests. Pterodon had one, but Nicosaurus took it to a level that just seems excessive. Nobody else went that far. While many pterosaurs, like Pteranodon, developed various forms of cranial crests, none approached the extreme, bifurcated, and seemingly functionless magnitude of Nyctosaurus. Its crest truly stands as an apex of pterosaurian ornamentation. But at least they could actually fly, though. Now, let's talk about the creature that people once confused for a snake, but was actually a whale. The dramatic misidentification of Basilosaurus isis as a marine reptile is a classic example of early paleontological challenges, exacerbated by the creature's extraordinary and snake-like proportions. Its true identity as an ancient whale completely reshaped our understanding of cetacean evolution. They found these bones in Alabama in the 1800s. It had a long vertebrae, really long. In fact, it was stretched out way more than normal. The first Basilosaurus fossils were unearthed in the Gulf coastal plain of Alabama in the early 19th century, with their exceptionally elongated vertebrae leading early naturalists to believe they belonged to a gigantic serpent. These vertebral proportions were unlike any known mammal at the time, contributing to the initial confusion. And at first, they thought it was a sea serpent, a giant marine reptile. That's why they call it Basilosaurus, which means king lizard. Except it wasn't a lizard. It was a whale that was 60 ft long and shaped like a snake, which is not how whales are supposed to be shaped. Richard Owen, a prominent anatomist, later correctly identified the remains as mammalian, belonging to an ancient whale. Despite this correction, the original name Basilosaurus, king lizard, persisted, a historical reminder of its initial misclassification. Modern whales are thick, stocky, and powerful. Basilosaurus was thin and bendy and moved through the water by wiggling its whole body like a snake. Unlike the robust, fusiform bodies of modern mysticetes and odontocetes, Basilosaurus possessed an incredibly slender and elongated body plan, perfectly suited for anguilliform eel-like locomotion. This serpentine swimming style allowed it to undulate its entire body for propulsion, a stark contrast to the powerful fluke-driven thrust of modern whales. But if you looked closely, you would see that it still had tiny back legs. They were useless for walking, but they were still there, a leftover from when whales lived on land. These diminutive, yet fully formed hind limbs were only about 60 cm, 2 feet, long and situated far back on the body, clearly vestigial and incapable of supporting the animal's weight on land. Their presence provides crucial anatomical evidence for the terrestrial ancestry of whales, linking them to early hoofed mammals. You could look at a basiosaur skeleton and see the little leg bones just hanging off the back, half doing nothing. Evolution hadn't gotten rid of them yet. These tiny limbs, though functionally useless for locomotion, still retained a complete set of foot bones and even toes, a clear homologous structure to the hind limbs of its land-dwelling ancestors. They represent an evolutionary intermediate, caught in the process of reduction. The skull was narrow and filled with sharp teeth. It ate fish and sharks and smaller whales. There's fossil stomach contents that prove this. Its powerful jaws, lined with heterodont teeth including sharp incisors, conical canines, and serrated molars, were well suited for grasping and shearing flesh. Fossilized stomach contents, including fish vertebrae and shark teeth, provide direct evidence of its predatory diet, cementing its role as an apex predator of its time. It was a top predator 40 million years ago in the Eocene, swimming around in warm, shallow seas, just being 60 ft of serpent whale. During the late Eocene epoch, Basilosaurus dominated the shallow, warm seas of the Tethys Ocean, which covered much of what is now the southeastern United States and North Africa. Its immense size and predatory prowess made it the undisputed ruler of these ancient waters. Instead of using a tail fluke to swim, it undulated. It moved its whole spine side to side, more like an eel than like a dolphin. This unique method of locomotion, relying on lateral undulations of its long body, distinguishes it from the vertical undulations of modern whales and dolphins. Its flexible spine and dense vertebrae supported this serpentine movement. The vertebrae were dense and heavy to help with buoyancy. It probably swam slow most of the time and then struck fast when something got close. The pachyostotic dense and osteosclerotic compact vertebrae would have helped Basilosaurus achieve neutral buoyancy, allowing it to glide stealthily beneath the water's surface. This combination of slow cruising and rapid ambush strikes would have been an effective hunting strategy. People in Alabama used to think the fossils were from sea monsters. They would find these huge bones and not know what they were looking at, and honestly, they weren't that far off. A 60 ft serpent whale is pretty close to a sea monster. The dramatic scale and unusual appearance of the fossil remains fueled local legends of ancient sea beasts, long before scientific classification could offer a rational explanation. The popular imagination was not far from the truth of a bizarre and colossal marine predator. Took a while before scientists realized this was actually a mammal, though, that it breathed air. That it was related to modern whales, because nothing about the shape made sense for a whale. The definitive mammalian characteristics, such as specific cranial features and the presence of vestigial hind limbs, ultimately confirmed its identity as an early cetacean. This realization provided crucial evidence for the evolutionary transition of whales from land to sea. And speaking of things that don't make any sense, there's a camel that used to be out there that had a trunk. The discovery of Macrauchenia patachonica presented a truly confounding enigma to early paleontologists, particularly Charles Darwin, due to its unique combination of ungulate features and an unexpected proboscis. Its isolated evolutionary history in South America led to a bizarre, chimera-like appearance. Charles Darwin found Macrauchenia fossils in 1834, and this is a guy who saw a lot of weird animals. He spent years traveling around looking at strange creatures. In fact, this was the one that made him go, "I don't know what I'm looking at." Darwin unearthed the first Macrauchenia fossils during his voyage on the HMS Beagle in Patagonia, Argentina. The peculiar mix of camel-like body and elephant-like trunk, along with its unique dental structure, left the seasoned naturalist utterly baffled and unable to categorize it, making it a profound source of evolutionary contemplation for him. It had a long neck, long legs, and looked kind of like a llama or a camel at first glance. It was built for running across open plains. Its graceful, long-limbed physique, combined with a relatively long neck, gave it a superficial resemblance to modern llamoids or camels, suggesting an adaptation for swift movement across open grasslands. These features were ideal for evading predators in the vast South American pampas. But then you get up to the skull and the nostrils are way up high between the eyes, not at the end of the snout where they should be. In fact, they're on top of its head. The retracted nasal opening, positioned dorsally on the skull, is a key anatomical indicator of the presence of a proboscis in many mammals. This unusual placement strongly suggested that Macrauchenia possessed a muscular, prehensile trunk, similar to that of a tapir or elephant. That means it probably had a short trunk, not elephant-sized, more like a tapir, just a flexible nose it could use to grab leaves or strip bark. This modest trunk, while not as long or powerful as an elephant's, would have been highly versatile, enabling precise browsing of vegetation. It would have allowed Macrauchenia to selectively pluck leaves and strip bark, supplementing its grazing diet. And nobody expected that because this thing wasn't related to elephants at all. It was a completely different branch of mammals that evolved in South America. The convergent evolution of a trunk in an ungulate from a distinct South American lineage, unrelated to Afrotheria, the superorder including elephants, highlights the independent development of similar adaptations in response to similar ecological pressures. This makes its proboscis a striking example of homoplasy. While that continent was isolated for millions of years, everything about Macrauchenia confused scientists. Was it related to camels? No. Horses? Not really. Rhinos also no. South America's long period of Cenozoic isolation fostered a unique evolutionary playground, leading to the development of endemic mammals like Macrauchenia with no close living relatives elsewhere. This biogeographical context explains its peculiar combination of traits, which defied easy classification into known orders. It took until 2016 before they did protein analysis and figured out it was distantly related to horses and rhinos, but split off right when the dinosaurs died out. Revolutionary collagen sequencing techniques, performed on fossil remains from the Pampean region, finally revealed Macrauchenia's phylogenetic position within Litopterna, an extinct order of South American ungulates related to Perissodactyla, odd-toed ungulates like horses and rhinos. This genetic evidence provided the long-sought answer to its evolutionary enigma. So, it had 65 million years of separate evolution, and it survived until about 10,000 years ago. And it lived alongside giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats and probably traveled in herds. This impressive span of independent evolution allowed for the development of its unique adaptations. Macrauchenia was a late survivor of the South American megafauna, coexisting with formidable predators and other iconic Ice Age giants, suggesting it was a successful and well-adapted herbivore. And it would use those long legs to run away from predators, and maybe use the trunk to communicate or to pull down branches other herbivores couldn't reach. Its powerful legs were undoubtedly its primary defense against predators like Smilodon, allowing for sustained high-speed flight across open plains. The trunk, beyond feeding, might also have played a role in social interactions, tactile exploration, or even manipulating objects in its environment. The name means long llama, which is accurate for the body, but completely ignores the whole trunk situation. And honestly, that's the most interesting part. The common name, derived from its llama-like body, fails to capture the most distinctive and puzzling feature of Macrauchenia. This oversight underscores how much its proboscis baffled early naturalists and makes the corrected understanding even more remarkable. This was a hoofed animal with a trunk that's not an elephant wandering around South America until quite recently. Humans might have even seen these things before they went extinct. Macrauchenia vanished during the late Pleistocene extinction event, making it likely that early human inhabitants of South America, possibly the earliest Paleo-Indians, encountered these incredible trunked ungulates. Its relatively recent extinction adds a poignant connection to our own history. Now trunks are weird, but at least they're small, unlike one elephant's jaw. Take an elephant. Now flatten its lower jaw into a shovel shape. Put two wide tusks on the shovel pointing forwards. That's Plato-Bedon. The extinct proboscidean Platyblodon grangerii stands as one of the most visually striking and functionally specialized members of the elephant lineage, with a lower jaw transformed into an extraordinary feeding apparatus. Its bizarre morphology challenged initial assumptions about its dietary habits. This thing lived 15 to 20 million years ago, and it was about the size of a large hippo and had a normalish elephant body with a short trunk. Platyblodon thrived during the Miocene epoch, inhabiting floodplains and swampy regions across Africa, Asia, and North America. Despite its unusual jaw, its overall body plan was comparable to a large tapir or small rhinoceros, and it likely possessed a short, muscular trunk in addition to its lower, shovel tusks. Then you get to the mouth, and it's just wrong because the lower jaw stuck straight out. It was flat and wide, and there was two tusks on the end that were shaped like curved blades laying sideways. The fused mandibular symphysis formed a broad, flattened spatula, extending far beyond the upper jaw. At the end of this shovel were two prominent, flattened incisors that developed into outward curving, blade-like tusks, unlike the more conventional pointed tusks of other proboscideans. Early scientists thought it lived in swamps, scooping up mud and plants, using the shovel jaw to dig into lake beds and dredging up food. There were even illustrations showing it worked like a backhoe. This initial hypothesis, based purely on the shovel-like appearance of its jaw, seemed logical given its suspected habitat. Artistic reconstructions often depicted Platyblodon as a bottom dweller, using its jaw to dredge soft aquatic vegetation. And that made sense given what it looked like, but they were wrong. Where patterns on the tusks show it was actually cutting vegetation, it would clamp that shovel jaw around branches and yank. The sharp edges of the tusks would slice through soft wood and bark. Detailed analysis of micro-wear patterns and striations on the fossilized tusks and teeth definitively debunked the dredging hypothesis. These wear marks indicated a cutting and shearing action, consistent with stripping bark and woody vegetation. The upper and lower teeth worked together like scissors, snipping reeds, stripping trees, just mowing through plants. The combination of its shovel-like lower jaw tusks and its upper tusk equivalents, along with its specialized molars, formed a highly efficient cutting and shearing mechanism. This allowed Platyblodon to process tough, fibrous plant material including reeds, branches, and bark, making it an effective browser. The front edges of the tusks are worn down and polished. You can see where they rubbed against stuff over and over, so it wasn't scooping, it was cutting. The distinct polished facets and abrasive wear on the leading edges of the lower tusks provide compelling physical evidence of their primary function in cutting and stripping vegetation. This clear indicator of use confirmed its browsing rather than dredging diet. The whole mouth was a plant processing tool. Platybiladen lived in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Fossils of it are pretty common. This highly specialized feeding apparatus allowed Platybladen to exploit a unique dietary niche, giving it access to food sources that other herbivores might have struggled to consume. Its widespread fossil distribution across multiple continents attests to its evolutionary success and adaptability within its environment. It was a successful animal for several million years. Then, around 10 million years ago, it went extinct. The more normal-looking elephants and mammoths took over. Its long reign during the Miocene highlights the effectiveness of its specialized feeding strategy. However, environmental changes, competition from other browsers, or the rise of more generalized proboscideans may have ultimately contributed to its decline and extinction. Turns out you don't need a shovel mouth to succeed as an elephant. When people first saw the fossils, they thought it was a joke. The jaws looked fake. They were too ridiculous to be real. The extreme and almost cartoonish morphology of Platybladen jaw was so unusual that it initially challenged the credibility of paleontological discoveries. However, the consistent presence of this feature across numerous specimens confirmed its authenticity and its place in the diverse tapestry of life. But there are enough specimens that we have found that we know it was real. Evolution just tried out this design for a while and then moved on. The abundance of Platybladen fossils, including multiple complete mandibles, solidifies its existence and its bizarre anatomy. It serves as a prime example of evolution's experimental nature, where highly specialized forms emerge, thrive for a period, and then disappear, leaving behind their unique mark on the fossil record. Now, 2 weird tusks is nothing compared to 4 horns that don't really make any sense. The ancient mammal Arsinotherium zittily presented an unprecedented combination of cranial ornamentation, featuring not just 1, but 2 pairs of prominent bony horns. Its unique appearance further complicated its classification and understanding within the mammalian family tree. Arsinotherium had 2 giant horns on its nose, each one about 2 feet long, and then 2 smaller knobs on its forehead above the eyes. 4 horns in total. The anterior pair of horns, situated above the nasal bones, could indeed reach up to 60 cm, 2 feet in length, pointing forward and slightly upward. Above its eyes on the frontal bones were 2 additional, smaller, dome-shaped knobs, completing its quartet of cranial projections. It looked like a rhinoceros, and it was about the same size. It moved like a rhino, acted like a rhino, but it wasn't a rhino. It wasn't even close. Weighing around 2.5 to 3 tons and standing approximately 1.75 meters, 5.7 feet, tall at the shoulder, Arsinotherium was superficially convergent with modern rhinoceroses in size and robust build. This ecological parallelism, however, masked a profound phylogenetic divergence. What was it then? Well, this thing belonged to its own group of mammals that's completely extinct now. It has no living relatives. Well, maybe elephants and manatees if you go really, really far back, but even that's a stretch. Arsinotherium is the namesake of the extinct order Embrithopoda, a unique lineage of Afrotherian mammals. Its closest modern relatives are indeed very distant, perhaps among the Proboscidea elephants or Sirenia manatees, but it represents a distinct and now entirely vanished branch of mammalian evolution. Arsinotherium was basically alone on its own branch of the family tree. It lived 30 to 36 million years ago in North Africa, back when that area was tropical and swampy, and it weighed about 2 tons, 8 plants, and probably hung out near water. Thriving during the late Eocene and early Oligocene epochs, Arsinotherium inhabited the lush, humid environments of ancient North Africa, particularly the Fayum Depression in Egypt. Its large size and inferred semi-aquatic habits suggest it browsed on soft vegetation along riverbanks and in swamps. And it used those big horns for defense and for fighting other Arsinotheriums. The horns were real bone covered in keratin, not like rhino horns, which are all keratin. These had a bony core and they were more permanent and couldn't break off. Unlike the purely keratinous horns of rhinos, Arsinotherium's horns were osteoc or supported, meaning they possessed a permanent bony core covered by a keratin sheath. This robust construction made them highly durable, ideal for intraspecific combat and deterring large predators. Males probably locked horns and shoved each other around to see who was stronger, and any predator trying to attack would have to get past two giant spikes. Evidence from fossilized skulls and horn, where patterns suggests that males engaged in ritualized combat, using their formidable headgear to establish dominance within social hierarchies. These impressive horns would also have provided a significant deterrent against large contemporary predators such as creodonts or giant crocodilians. There weren't many predators big enough to threaten a full-grown Aristheum anyway. Maybe large creodonts, maybe big crocodiles, but not much else. Given its immense size and armored head, a fully grown Arsinoitherium would have been largely invulnerable to predation. Its only serious threats might have come from the largest terrestrial carnivores of the time, such as Megistitherium or enormous aquatic reptiles. The horns were probably more for competing with each other than for actual defense because of its size. This interpretation, common for large, well-armored herbivores, suggests that the primary selective pressure for such elaborate weaponry was likely male-on-male competition for mates or territory. The sheer bulk of Arsinoitherium provided a baseline defense, while the horns offered a clear advantage in social contests. In fact, when scientists first found it, they didn't know what to do with it because they couldn't fit it into any existing group. It was just this horned herbivore that didn't match anything else. The initial discovery of Arsinoitherium by Bednell and Andrews in 1901 presented a significant taxonomic challenge, as its unique combination of features defied easy placement within known mammalian orders. Its distinct morphology highlighted the independent evolutionary paths taken by Afrotherian mammals, and they still don't really have a good answer because it's an evolutionary dead end. A unique experiment that worked for a few million years and then disappeared. Arsinoitherium and its order Embrithopoda eventually went extinct without leaving any direct descendants, representing a fascinating but ultimately transient evolutionary experiment. Its specialized design was successful for a period, but it did not lead to a lasting lineage. It was named after Egyptian queen, but the animal itself seems more like something from mythology. Arsinoitherium is named after Queen Arsinoe II of Ptolemaic Egypt, whose reign coincided with the discovery of the fossils. Its majestic, almost fantastical appearance, combining rhino-like bulk with multi-pronged horns, truly evokes images of ancient mythical beasts, making its scientific name all the more fitting for a creature that seems to defy reality. And those are just some of the prehistoric creatures out there that should not exist because they are so damn strange. The fossil record is a continuous source of wonder, revealing the boundless inventiveness of evolution in producing forms that push the boundaries of our imagination and scientific understanding. These bizarre and often short-lived evolutionary experiments remind us of the incredible diversity that has flourished and faded throughout Earth's deep history. Now imagine a deer, but it has fangs, and not just fangs, but sabers. This is Hoplotomryx, a genus of extinct deer-like ruminants that lived on an isolated island in what is now Italy during the Miocene. Its most startling feature was a set of saber-like upper canines, a trait typically associated with predators, not herbivores. It also had 5 horns. Yes, 5. A central horn on its nose, and 2 pairs of pronged horns above its eyes, making it look like a demonic, fanged deer. This bizarre combination of cranial weaponry and saber teeth on a single herbivorous animal is unparalleled in the mammalian fossil record, highlighting the strange evolutionary paths that can occur in isolated island environments. These animals were part of a unique island fauna that evolved in isolation for millions of years. This phenomenon, known as island gigantism or dwarfism, often leads to strange adaptations. In the case of Hoplotomryx, it led to a creature that combined features of a deer, a musk deer, and something out of a fantasy novel. The fangs were probably used for fighting. Much like modern musk deer, the males likely used their sharp canines in territorial disputes or to compete for mates, slashing at each other's necks and flanks. The horns, which were permanent and bony like a giraffe's ossicones, would have also been used for combat, giving these animals a dual set of weapons. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. Because it lived on an island with limited resources, it had short, stout legs. It was probably not a fast runner like mainland deer because there were no large predators to escape from. Its stocky build suggests it was a slow-moving browser, well adapted to navigating the rugged terrain of its island home rather than open plains. The existence of Hoplotomryx demonstrates what happens when evolution is left to its own devices in a constrained environment. Without the usual pressures of predation and competition from mainland species, natural selection can favor traits that seem bizarre to us, like a five-horned, saber-toothed deer. It's a reminder that the rules of evolution can be bent in remarkable ways. From island oddities, we move to the ocean's depths, to something that looks like a failed experiment in building a shark. Helicoprion was a prehistoric fish that lived from the Permian to the Triassic, and it had a circular saw for a jaw. Not an analogy, a literal spiral of teeth that curled under its chin like a buzzsaw. For over a century, scientists had no idea what to do with this thing. All they found were these spiral fossils of teeth called tooth whorls, and they couldn't figure out where they went. Some thought it was a defensive spine on its back. Others imagined it was part of its tail. The true placement of the tooth whorl remained one of paleontology's most enduring mysteries. It wasn't until CT scans of a well-preserved skull in 2013 that they figured it out. The tooth whorl was its lower jaw. The new teeth would grow in the back of the spiral, pushing the older, smaller teeth forward and down into a coil inside its mandible. It was a conveyor belt of teeth, unlike anything alive today. So how did it eat? The current theory is that it hunted soft-bodied prey like squid and ammonites. It would swim up and swing its jaw, using the spiral of teeth to slice through them. The rotation of the jaw would also help pull the food into its throat. It was a highly specialized feeding mechanism for a very specific type of prey. The rest of its body was probably shark-like, made of cartilage, which is why we only find the tooth whorls. But its existence alone is a testament to the strange solutions evolution can come up with. It's a fish that evolved a circular saw in its mouth, thrived for millions of years across a mass extinction event, and then vanished, leaving behind one of the weirdest dental arrangements in the history of life. It makes you wonder what other biological power tools are still waiting to be discovered. But tools are one thing. What about an animal that was just a head? Just a giant, armored head with fins? That was Dunkleosteus, a prehistoric placoderm that ruled the Devonian seas about 360 million years ago. This thing wasn't just a fish. It was a swimming tank with a mouth that could bite a shark in half. Dunkleosteus could grow up to 6 meters, or 20 feet, long, and about a third of that was its heavily armored head. It didn't have teeth. Instead, it had 2 pairs of sharp bony plates that acted like a self-sharpening guillotine. As it closed its mouth, the plates would grind against each other, keeping their edges razor-sharp. The bite force of this thing was incredible. Scientists estimate it could clamp down with 8,000 pounds of force per square inch, putting it in the same league as a T-Rex or a large crocodile. It had one of the most powerful bites of any animal, ever. It could shear through bone, armor, and anything else unlucky enough to get in its way. The rest of its body behind the armored head was probably unarmored and shark-like, but we don't have many fossils of it. The head armor was so dense and heavy, it was the part that fossilized best. So for the longest time, paleontologists pictured it as just this giant, unstoppable head swimming through the ocean. It was an apex predator of its time, a true sea monster. It would have eaten anything it wanted, including other large armored fish, but its reign was relatively short. The placoderms, the group of armored fish that included Dunkleosteus, went extinct at the end of the Devonian, paving the way for the rise of modern sharks and bony fish. For a while, though, the ocean belonged to the guillotine-faced tank fish. And if you think that's specialized, let's talk about the dinosaur that only had one finger. Just one. Mononychus was a small theropod dinosaur from the late Cretaceous, about the size of a large chicken. It was covered in feathers, had long legs for running, and a tiny skull with small teeth, suggesting it ate insects or small lizards. But its arms were the weird part. They were incredibly short and stubby, and each hand had only a single large claw on it. Not 3 claws like a velociraptor or 2, but 1. The other fingers were gone, reduced to nothing. It had these 2 tiny arms with 1 giant claw on each, sticking out from its chest. So what was it doing with them? It couldn't use them to grab things. It couldn't use them to fight. The best guess is that it used them for digging. Like a prehistoric mole, it would have used its powerful single claw to rip open termite mounds or tear apart rotting logs to find insects. Its whole body was built for this. The arm bone, the humerus, was short and wide, and the chest was reinforced with a bony plate, all adaptations for withstanding the stress of powerful digging motions. It was a highly specialized insectivore, a feathered dinosaur that had turned its arms into a pair of pickaxes. Mononychus is a perfect example of how evolution can take a basic body plan in this case, the theropod arm, and modify it for a very specific purpose, even if it means getting rid of almost everything else. It didn't need hands for grasping, so it traded them for the most efficient bug-finding tool it could evolve. It's a reminder that in evolution, sometimes less is more. From a single finger, we go to a creature with no neck, or at least it looked that way. Henotus was a placodont, a type of marine reptile from the Triassic period, and it looked exactly like a turtle. It had a wide, flat shell covering its back and another one covering its belly. It was about 1 meter wide and almost perfectly round. It even had a beak just like a turtle, but it wasn't a turtle. It was from a completely different branch of reptiles that just happened to evolve to look almost identical to one. This is a classic case of convergent evolution, where two unrelated groups of animals independently evolved the same features to solve the same problems. But Henotus was even weirder than a turtle. Its beak didn't have teeth in the front, but it had a single pair of teeth on the side of its mouth and rows of small, crushing teeth on the roof of its mouth. And its shell was made of hundreds of small bones fused together, a mosaic of armor different from the large plates of a turtle shell. The strangest part was its lifestyle. For a long time, scientists thought it was a filter feeder. Its beak had baleen-like grooves in it, and its skull had features suggesting it could strain small invertebrates from the water, like a modern gray whale. It was a reptile trying to be both a turtle and a whale at the same time. It probably lived in brackish or freshwater lagoons, scraping algae off rocks with its beak and filtering small crustaceans from the mud. It was a slow-moving, heavily armored, bottom-feeding reptile that had taken specialization to a whole new level. It was so turtle-like that for a long time, that's what everyone thought it was. But it was just another one of evolution's strange and wonderful experiments that eventually came to an end. It was a turtle that wasn't a turtle, doing a job that no other reptile has ever tried. And then there's the animal that tried to be a lawnmower. Nigersaurus was a sauropod dinosaur from the Cretaceous period in Africa. Now, sauropods are the long-necked, long-tailed plant eaters like Brontosaurus. They're usually known for reaching high into the trees to eat leaves. Nigersaurus did the opposite. It was a relatively small sauropod, only about 9 meters long, and its neck was held straight out, pointing down. It couldn't lift its head very high. It was built for grazing, feeding on low-lying plants like ferns and horsetails, essentially acting as a 30-foot-long Mesozoic cow. But its mouth was what made it truly bizarre. Its skull was incredibly delicate and full of holes, more air than bone, and its mouth was shaped like a wide, flat vacuum cleaner attachment. It was wider than its own skull, and at the very front edge, it had over 500 teeth arranged in a straight line. These weren't normal teeth. They were tiny, needle-like teeth packed together in dense batteries. And behind each tooth in the jaw, there were up to 9 replacement teeth stacked up, ready to go. This thing had thousands of teeth in its head at any one time. It was a tooth-making machine. It would walk along with its head down, using its wide mouth to shear off huge swaths of vegetation with each bite. The teeth would wear out incredibly fast, maybe as quickly as every 14 days, and a new one would just slide into place. It was a living hedge trimmer, a dinosaur that had evolved a disposable, high-turnover system for constantly mowing the Cretaceous landscape. It took the sauropod body plan and completely re-engineered it for a life of low-level grazing, creating one of the strangest feeding adaptations in the history of dinosaurs. And if you think that's a lot of teeth, you haven't met Edestus, the scissor-toothed shark. This was another prehistoric cartilaginous fish, related to Helicoprion, that lived during the Carboniferous period. But instead of a spiral jaw, Edestus had jaws that grew straight out, like a pair of jagged pinking shears. Like its buzzsaw-jawed cousin, the teeth never fell out. As new teeth grew in the back of the jaw, the old ones were pushed forward, with the jaw bone growing along with them. This resulted in two long, curved rows of teeth sticking straight out of its mouth, one on the top and one on the bottom. It couldn't close its mouth in the normal way. The jaws would have just clashed together. It's thought that it hunted by swimming up to prey and thrashing its head up and down, using its bizarre tooth blades to slash and cripple its victims before eating them. It was less of a bite and more of a violent stabbing motion with its entire face. No one is entirely sure what it looked like. We've only found the jaws, which can be over 2 feet long. The rest of the body, being cartilage, didn't fossilize. But the jaws alone tell a story of a predator with a weapon so strange it's hard to even picture how it worked effectively. It's another example of the wild west of Paleozoic seas, where evolution was trying out every possible design for being a top predator, including turning your entire face into a set of serrated scissors. And finally, let's talk about the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. This one is different because it's not a dinosaur, not a prehistoric reptile. It went extinct in 1936. We have footage of it, we have photos, and it was still one of the strangest creatures to ever exist. At first glance, it looks like a dog or a wolf with a long snout and stripes on its back. But it wasn't a dog, it was a marsupial. It was more closely related to a kangaroo or a koala than to any canine. It was the largest carnivorous marsupial of modern times, and it had a pouch, just like a kangaroo, where it raised its young. This is another incredible example of convergent evolution. On the isolated continent of Australia, a marsupial evolved to fill the same ecological niche as the wolf or the tiger on other continents, and it ended up looking and acting remarkably like them, despite being on a completely different branch of the mammalian family tree. But there were differences. Its jaw could open to an incredible, almost unbelievable 120 degrees, wider than any dog. Its hind legs were slightly longer than its front legs, giving it a strange, stiff gait. And its tail was thick and rigid at the base, more like a kangaroo's than a dog's, acting as a counterbalance. It was an ambush predator, hunting kangaroos, wallabies, and birds in the forests of Tasmania. It was driven to extinction by humans, who hunted it relentlessly because they believed it was a threat to their sheep. The last known thylacine, named Benjamin, died alone in a zoo in Hobart, Tasmania. The story of the thylacine is a tragic one, not just because it's gone, but because it represents the loss of a truly unique evolutionary path. It was a marsupial that tried to be a wolf, a testament to the power of evolution to find similar solutions to similar problems, no matter how different the starting point. It's a creature that shouldn't have existed, but did, right up until we made sure it didn't anymore. And that brings us to the Hallucigenia, a creature so bizarre that when scientists first found its fossils, they couldn't even tell which way was up. For decades, they reconstructed it walking on its long, sharp spines, with a row of tentacles on its back that they thought were for feeding. It looked like something from a nightmare, hence the name. It lived during the Cambrian explosion, over 500 million years ago, a time when life was experimenting with body plans in ways that seem alien to us now. Hallucigenia was a tiny, worm-like creature, only a few centimeters long, but its anatomy was a puzzle. It wasn't until they found more complete fossils in the 2010s that they figured it out. They had it upside down and backwards. The tentacles were actually pairs of clawed legs, and the legs were defensive spines on its back. And what they thought was the tail was actually the head, a blobby thing with a simple mouth and a pair of eyes. It was a Lobopodian, an early ancestor of modern velvet worms, and maybe even all arthropods. It was a small, spiky worm scuttling along the seafloor on its 10 pairs of stumpy legs. The spines were there to protect it from predators, making it a spiky, unappetizing mouthful for whatever was trying to eat it. The story of Hallucigenia is a story about perspective. It shows how our own assumptions can make it hard to understand something truly alien. For years, paleontologists were trying to make sense of it based on what they knew, and they got it completely wrong. It took new evidence to flip their perspective, literally, and reveal the true nature of one of the earliest and strangest experiments in animal life. It reminds us that the history of life is full of creatures that defy our expectations, and that sometimes, the weirdest thing about them is our own inability to see them for what they really are. And that's just scratching the surface. For every creature we've found, there are thousands, maybe millions, that we haven't. The fossil record is an incomplete book with most of its pages missing. But every now and then, we find a page that describes something so strange, so counterintuitive, so wonderfully impossible, that it reminds us that the story of life is far more creative and bizarre than we could ever imagine. These creatures shouldn't exist by our modern logic, but they did. And our world is richer for it, even if all that's left is their strange and beautiful bones. There's a dinosaur with a club on its tail that's not Ankylosaurus. This is Shunnosaurus, a sauropod from the Middle Jurassic of China. And while most sauropods had long, whip-like tails, Shunnosaurus had a bony club at the end, complete with 2 pairs of 5-centimeter-long spikes. It was a long-necked plant eater that had evolved a mace for a tail. This was a complete surprise when it was discovered. A sauropod with a defensive weapon like an ankylosaur was unheard of. It suggests that it lived in an environment with large predators, like the theropod Gasosaurus, and it needed a way to defend itself. It would have been able to swing its tail with considerable force, using the spiky club to break the legs or shatter the ribs of an attacker. It's another example of how dinosaurs we thought we understood can still surprise us. We had a neat box for sauropods: long neck, big body, whip tail. Shunnosaurus broke that box. It shows that evolution wasn't following a simple script. It was a messy, creative process, borrowing ideas from different groups and putting them together in new and unexpected ways. A giant, long-necked herbivore with a medieval weapon attached to its body is just one of the strange and wonderful results. But a weapon is one thing. What about a head that was also a lung? The Diplocaulus is an amphibian from the Permian period, and it had a head shaped like a giant boomerang. It was wide, flat, and triangular, with 2 long prongs sticking out from the back of its skull. For a long time, the purpose of this bizarre head was a mystery. Some thought it was for defense, making it too wide for a predator to swallow. Others suggested it acted like a hydrofoil, helping it stay on the riverbed in fast-moving currents. But a more recent and stranger theory is that it was part of its respiratory system. The skin flaps stretched over the boomerang head could have been filled with blood vessels, acting as an external gill, allowing it to absorb oxygen directly from the water. In the low-oxygen environments of the Permian, having a giant, head-mounted breathing apparatus would have been a huge advantage. It's a creature that seems to defy all sense of good design. It was a salamander with a boomerang for a head that might have also been a lung. It's a reminder that in the deep past, the solutions to the problems of life were often far stranger than we can imagine. The Diplocaulus is a testament to a time when the rules of biology were still being written, and some of the rough drafts were truly bizarre. And then there's the dinosaur that tried to be an armadillo. Stegosaurus was an armored dinosaur discovered in Chile in 2021. It was a type of ankylosaur, but it came from the southern supercontinent of Gondwana, and it evolved in a completely different way from its northern cousins. While ankylosaurs like Ankylosaurus had a giant, bony club at the end of their tail, Stegosaurus had something even stranger. Its tail was short, and the last half of it was covered by a flat, frond-like structure made of 7 pairs of flattened, bony plates fused together. It looked like a fern leaf, or the Aztec war club known as a macuahuitl. This weapon is unique among all known dinosaurs. It was a slashing, cutting weapon, not a blunt force club. The dinosaur would have swung its tail from side to side, using the sharp edges of its tail blades to slice at the legs and underbelly of predators. The discovery of Stegosaurus completely changed our understanding of ankylosaur evolution. It showed that the southern armored dinosaurs evolved a completely different set of weapons than their northern relatives. They weren't just copies, they were a whole new experiment in dinosaurian defense. It's a creature that looks like it was designed by a committee of an armadillo, a fern, and a medieval weapons expert. And it's another reminder of how much we still have to learn about the incredible diversity of life on this planet, from a weaponized tail to a weaponized face. Pegamastax was a small herbivorous dinosaur from the early Jurassic in South Africa. It was only about 2 feet long, and it belonged to a group called heterodontosaurs, known for having different types of teeth in their mouths. But Pegamastax took this to an extreme. It had a short, parrot-like beak, which it used for nipping off plants. But behind the beak, it had a pair of long, sharp canines like a vampire. It was a tiny, plant-eating dinosaur with fangs. And if that wasn't weird enough, its whole body was probably covered in porcupine-like quills. It was a 2-foot-long, bristly, fanged parrot lizard. The purpose of the fangs is still debated. They weren't for eating meat. Its jaw and other teeth were clearly designed for grinding plants. The most likely explanation is that they were for display and self-defense. The males might have used them to fight each other for mates, or they could have been a last resort weapon to fend off small predators. Imagine a tiny, bipedal porcupine with a parrot's beak and a vampire's fangs. That was Pegomastax. It's a creature that seems to be made from the leftover parts of 3 different animals, a tiny, bristly Frankenstein's monster of the Jurassic. It shows that even the small herbivores of the dinosaur world could be just as bizarre and specialized as the giant predators. And speaking of bizarre heads, let's look at Opabinia. Another creature from the Cambrian explosion, Opabinia was so strange that when it was first presented to a room full of paleontologists in 1972, the entire room burst out laughing. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Opabinia had 5 eyes on stalks on top of its head. Not 2, not 4, but 5. And it had a long, flexible proboscis, like a vacuum cleaner hose, sticking out of the front of its face. And at the end of that proboscis was a claw. It was a small, swimming arthropod that used its 5 eyes to look for prey on the seafloor. Then it would use its long, claw-tipped hose to grab small, soft-bodied creatures and bring them to its mouth, which was located under its head, facing backwards. It's one of the quintessential examples of the weirdness of the Cambrian. It's a body plan that seems to have no modern equivalent. A 5-eyed, hose-faced, backwards-eating shrimp thing. It was one of evolution's early drafts for what an animal could be, and it's a design that was never repeated. The story of Opabinia is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that our modern understanding of biology is based on the survivors of 500 million years of evolution. The Cambrian was a time of wild experimentation, and many of those experiments, like Opabinia, were successful for a time, but ultimately led to dead ends. They are ghosts of alternate evolutionary paths, a glimpse into a world of biological possibilities that is almost beyond our comprehension. And finally, we have Tanystropheus. For 50 years, this dinosaur was one of the greatest mysteries in paleontology. All we had were its arms. And they were the biggest arms of any bipedal animal that has ever lived. They were 2.4 meters long, that's 8 feet, and ended in 3 huge, curved claws. For decades, that's all scientists had. Just these giant, terrifying arms. They didn't know what the rest of the animal looked like. They imagined it was a gigantic, ferocious predator, a Cretaceous monster that would dwarf even T-Rex. Then, in the 2010s, they found more complete skeletons. And the truth was so much stranger than they could have ever imagined. Tanystropheus wasn't a predator. It was a giant, pot-bellied, hump-backed omnivore. It looked like a nightmarish, 11-meter-long duck. It had a long, toothless, duck-billed snout. It had a huge sail-like hump on its back, formed by elongated spines on its vertebrae. Its feet were short and wide, suggesting it walked on soft ground, maybe in swamps. And yes, it had those giant 3-clawed arms. Stomach contents show that it ate fish and plants. It was a giant, swamp-dwelling, hump-backed duck dinosaur. The giant claws on its massive arms weren't for killing. They were probably used for digging up plants, pulling down branches, or maybe for defense. The story of Tanystropheus is the ultimate paleontological bait and switch. We were promised a monster, a super predator. What we got was a giant, goofy-looking swamp creature. And that's so much better. It's a perfect encapsulation of the theme of this whole journey. The reality of prehistoric life is always weirder, more complex, and more wonderful than our imaginations. These creatures don't just break the rules of biology. They remind us that the rules are just suggestions, and that life, in its endless, beautiful, and sometimes hilarious creativity, is always willing to try something new. The world is full of creatures that should not exist. And that's what makes the story of life on Earth the greatest story ever told. And then there's the dinosaur that had bat wings, Yichi. Discovered in China in 2015, this tiny, pigeon-sized dinosaur from the Jurassic period completely changed our understanding of how flight could evolve. It belonged to a strange group of theropods called Sharovipteryx, known for their long fingers. But Yichi had something no other dinosaur has ever been found with. It had a long, bony rod extending from its wrist, similar to the styliform bone found in flying squirrels and bats. And preserved with the fossil were remnants of a membrane, a skin flap that stretched from this bony rod to its long third finger and down to its body. It wasn't flying with feathers. It was flying with bat-like leathery wings. This was a dinosaur that independently evolved a completely different method of flight from birds. While its relatives were experimenting with feathered wings, Yichi and its cousins went a completely different route, developing membranous wings like a pterosaur or a bat. It was probably a clumsy flyer, more of a glider than a powerful flapper. It would have climbed trees and then launched itself, gliding from branch to branch in the Jurassic forests. But its existence alone is a bombshell. It means that the evolution of flight in dinosaurs was not a single, straight line leading to birds. It was a messy, experimental process, with multiple different solutions being tried out at the same time. Yichi is a ghost of one of these failed experiments, a tantalizing glimpse into an alternate path that dinosaur flight could have taken. It was a dinosaur that tried to be a bat, and for a little while it actually worked. And from a dinosaur with bat wings, we go to a mammal with a club tail. Doedicurus was a giant glyptodont, a prehistoric relative of the armadillo that lived in South America during the Pleistocene. This thing was the size of a small car, about 1.5 meters tall and weighing over a ton. It was covered in a huge, domed, turtle-like shell made of fused bony plates, but its most incredible feature was its tail. It was long, bony, and at the very end it had a massive, spiked club. It was a giant, armored mammal with a medieval mace for a tail, just like an ankylosaur. It's another stunning example of convergent evolution, with a mammal and a dinosaur independently evolving the exact same weapon for the exact same purpose: self-defense. Doedicurus would have been a slow-moving grazer, and its primary defense against predators like the saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, would have been its armor and its powerful tail. It could have swung that club with enough force to shatter bone, making it an incredibly dangerous animal to attack. The spikes on the club weren't even attached directly to the bone. They were embedded in the thick skin covering the club, which might have made them more flexible and less likely to break on impact. It was a well-engineered weapon, a product of millions of years of an arms race between predator and prey. Doedicurus survived until about 10,000 years ago, meaning that the first humans to arrive in South America would have seen these giant, armored beasts roaming the plains. They were part of the incredible megafauna that dominated the Ice Age, a world of giants that now exists only in the fossil record. And they are a powerful reminder that some of the most bizarre and wonderful designs in the history of life aren't confined to the age of dinosaurs. The age of mammals has had its fair share of monsters, too, and sometimes those monsters are just a mouth. Stomatasuchus was a giant, 10-meter-long crocodile that lived in the Cretaceous of what is now the Sahara Desert. But it wasn't a predator like its modern relatives. Its skull was long, flat, and wide, and its lower jaw was incredibly thin and delicate, and it had no teeth. Instead, its lower jaw supported a huge, pelican-like throat pouch. Stomatasuchus was a filter feeder. It was a 33-foot-long, toothless crocodile that acted like a blue whale. It would have cruised through the rivers and swamps of Cretaceous North Africa, opening its massive mouth to take in huge gulps of water and small prey, like fish and invertebrates. Then it would close its mouth and force the water out, using its massive throat pouch to trap the food inside. Unfortunately, the only known fossils of Stomatasuchus, a single massive skull, were destroyed during a bombing raid on Munich, Germany in 1944. All we have left are photographs and drawings. It's a ghost of a creature, a giant that we know existed but can no longer study directly. Its existence paints a picture of a very different kind of Cretaceous ecosystem. It wasn't just giant predatory dinosaurs and crocodiles. There were also giant, gentle filter feeders, filling the same niche that whales do today. Stomatasuchus was a crocodile that gave up the hunt and decided to become a living net, a bizarre and wonderful example of the incredible diversity of life that can exist when the conditions are right. From a gentle giant, we return to a tiny terror. Microraptor was a small, four-winged dromaeosaur from the early Cretaceous of China. It was about the size of a crow, and it was covered in feathers. But unlike modern birds, it didn't just have feathers on its arms. It had long, aerodynamic flight feathers on its legs as well. It had 4 wings. This discovery was a game changer. It proved that the evolution of bird flight was not a simple, linear process of arms turning into wings. For a time, there were dinosaurs that were experimenting with using both their arms and their legs to fly. How it flew is still a matter of debate. Some scientists think it held its legs out to the side, like a biplane. Others think it held them underneath its body, creating a single tandem wing. But either way, it was a capable flyer, probably gliding from tree to tree and hunting small animals. We even know what it ate. One fossil was found with the remains of a small bird in its stomach, and another was found with a fish. It was an agile predator of the forest canopy, and we even know what color it was. By examining the fossilized pigment cells in its feathers, scientists have determined that Microraptor was iridescent, with a glossy black sheen like a modern grackle or crow. So picture this: a 4-winged, crow-sized, iridescent dinosaur gliding through the prehistoric forests of China. It's a creature that seems more at home in the movie Avatar than in the real history of our planet. But it was real. And it's one of the most important fossils ever found for understanding the origin of birds and the incredible, messy, and beautiful process of evolution. It shows us that, for a time, the sky was full of 4-winged dragons. And if 4 wings are strange, what about no limbs at all? Amphisbaenians, or worm lizards, are a group of burrowing reptiles that are neither worms nor lizards. They are their own distinct group, and most of them have lost their legs completely, evolving a long, snake-like body for moving through the soil. But their weirdest feature is in their name. Amphisbaena comes from Greek, and it means goes both ways. These animals can move just as easily backwards as they can forwards. Their heads and tails are often blunt and hard to tell apart, and their skin is loose and ringed, allowing them to move through their burrows like an earthworm, contracting and expanding their bodies. They are masters of the subterranean world. Most of them are blind, with their eyes reduced to simple spots underneath their skin. They spend their entire lives underground, hunting for insects and worms. But one group of worm lizards, bipes, decided to keep their front legs. And only their front legs. These are snake-like reptiles with 2 mole-like, 5-clawed hands sticking out of the front of their bodies. They look like a tiny, mythical serpent. They use these powerful front legs to dig their burrows while the rest of their long, legless body follows behind. The amphisbaenians are a lesson in specialization. They are a group of reptiles that have so perfectly adapted to a life underground that they have shed almost everything that makes a reptile a reptile. They've lost their legs, their ears, their eyes. They have become living digging machines. And in the case of bipes, they show that even when you're committed to a legless lifestyle, sometimes it's worth keeping a good pair of hands. From the underground, we go to the treetops, to an animal that was part squirrel, part woodpecker, and part ii. Atopodentatus was another of the bizarre Scansoriopterygid dinosaurs from China, a relative of the bat-winged yiqi. It was a tiny, pigeon-sized dinosaur covered in simple, hair-like feathers. It didn't have the membrane wings of yiqi. Instead, it had 4 long, ribbon-like tail feathers, probably for display. But its weirdest feature was its hands. Like other members of its family, its 3rd finger was incredibly long, longer than its entire arm. What was it doing with this single, grotesquely elongated finger? The best guess comes from looking at a modern animal with a similar adaptation, the ii, a lemur from Madagascar. The ii uses its long, thin middle finger to tap on trees to find insect larvae and then to fish them out of their burrows. Atopodentatus probably did the same thing. It would have climbed trees, tapping on the bark with its long finger to listen for the movement of grubs, and then using that same finger as a probe to extract its meal. It was a dinosaur that had evolved to fill the niche of a woodpecker, but instead of a beak, it used its finger. It's a creature that seems almost comically specialized. A tiny, feathered dinosaur with a fishing rod for a finger. It's another example of the incredible diversity of lifestyles that dinosaurs adopted. They weren't all giant predators and herbivores. They were also tiny, specialized insectivores, filling every available niche in their environment with a creativity that is truly mind-boggling. It's a dinosaur that reminds us that sometimes the strangest tool for the job is the one you already have. And then there's the animal that never grew up. The axolotl is a species of salamander from Mexico, and it has a superpower. It never goes through metamorphosis. It remains in its larval aquatic form for its entire life. It's a Peter Pan of the amphibian world, an animal that refuses to grow up. It keeps its feathery external gills, its tadpole-like tail fin, and its lidless eyes. It lives its entire life in the water, a permanent teenager. This phenomenon is called neoteny, and while other salamanders can do it under certain conditions, the axolotl has made it its entire lifestyle. But its other superpower is even more incredible: regeneration. An axolotl can regrow almost any part of its body without scarring. It can regrow limbs, its tail, its jaw, its spine. It can even regrow parts of its brain and heart. It has one of the most advanced healing capabilities of any animal on Earth. This has made it a subject of intense scientific study. Scientists are trying to understand the genetic secrets of the axolotl, hoping to one day unlock the secrets of regeneration for humans. But in the wild, the axolotl is critically endangered. The lakes near Mexico City where it lives have been almost completely destroyed by pollution and development. This incredible, smiling creature, with its amazing biological gifts, is on the brink of disappearing forever. The axolotl is a living fossil, a glimpse into a strange evolutionary path. But it's also a warning. It's a reminder that some of the most wonderful and bizarre creatures on our planet are not locked away in the fossil record. They are alive right now, and they are depending on us for their survival. The axolotl is a creature that shouldn't exist, with powers that seem to come from science fiction, and it's our responsibility to make sure it continues to. And for our final creature, we return to the deep past, to a giant that walked on its knuckles. Chalicotherium was a bizarre mammal that lived from the Miocene to the Pliocene. It was a perissodactyl, meaning it was related to horses, rhinos, and tapirs. But it looked nothing like them. It had a head like a horse, a long neck, and a sloping back like a giraffe. But its front legs were much longer than its back legs, giving it a gorilla-like posture. And it didn't have hooves. Instead, it had huge, curved claws on its front feet. These claws were so large that it couldn't walk on the soles of its feet. It had to walk on its knuckles, just like a gorilla or a chimpanzee, to keep the claws from digging into the ground and wearing down. It was a horse-gorilla sloth, a chimera of an animal that defies easy classification. So what was it doing with these giant claws? It was a herbivore. It would have used its claws as hooks, pulling down large branches to eat the leaves, much like a giant sloth or the dinosaur the Rhizinosaurus. It was a giant, knuckle-walking browser, a niche that no other mammal has ever quite filled in the same way. The Chalicotherium is a perfect final example of the theme of our journey. It's an animal that takes familiar parts: a horse's head, a gorilla's stance, a sloth's claws, and puts them together in a way that is completely unexpected and utterly unique. It's a testament to the fact that evolution is not a linear march of progress. It's a sprawling, branching tree of possibilities, full of strange experiments, dead ends, and beautiful monsters. These are the creatures that challenge our understanding of what is possible. They are the outliers, the rule breakers, the glorious weirdos of the history of life. They are the proof that the universe has a much wilder imagination than we do. They are the creatures that should not exist, and that's precisely why they are so important. They stretch the boundaries of our world, and they remind us that there is always something new and wonderful to discover, if we only know